Patrick Madrid.
Thank you. Thank you. Boy, do I feel like the hometown kid coming back after a long time. It's so nice to see some familiar faces, people I haven't seen in years, and many new faces tonight. I'm told, and a few of you mentioned to me this evening, that you feel like you know me. One lady said, I feel like if I saw you on the street, you would say hello to me because you would know who I am because I hear your radio program. And so I just want to begin by a word of thanks to all of you who listen to Immaculate Heart Radio, who listen to my program among the other programs there. It means a lot to me to meet you in person and have a chance to have that connection with you. I love what I do every morning, I really do, and I wake up every morning thinking about what I'm going to talk about on the program, and I go to bed every night thinking about what I'm going to talk about the next day. So just know that our connection on the radio is a real one to me, and it means a lot to me that you've taken time to come here for this, so my thanks to all of you. I was very surprised and happy that my 5th grade teacher showed up before the event tonight. She says, you probably don't remember me, do you? I said, no, ma'am. She says, I was your 5th grade teacher here at the Mission San Juan Capistrano Grammar School, 80 years ago, whatever it was. And she's looking great and doing very well. I did attend grammar school here, and I grew up not far from here in Mission Viejo. So my sister Mary and her husband Joe, where's Mary? Is Mary? There's Mary. Mary, do you mind? Let me embarrass you now. We'll just get it out of the way. This is my sister Mary, my baby sister. Joe, why don't you stand up too? This is my brother-in-law. Mary works here at JSerra School, and they also live in Ladera Ranch, not far from here. So a lot of family roots, a lot of great memories from this area, and it's nice to be back. And I know that those of you who are listening to me on the radio program and seeing me now tonight, you're probably thinking to yourself, he sounds much taller on the radio. I don't mind that. I'm told that I sound like Patrick Coffin, and I'm told that Patrick Coffin sounds like me. Let me just see a show of hands. How many of you think that's true? Is that true? I was afraid of that. 2 quick stories, then I'll get into the meat of my talk. Patrick and I are good friends. We talk frequently, and sometimes I'll fill in for him on his program. I think he might have filled in for my show one time that I can recall. But people say that we sound alike, and at first I didn't really think so. I didn't hear it. Patrick told me one day he got a call from his mom. He was on his day off, and she said, I was just listening to the show this afternoon. I didn't catch all of it, but I caught 20 minutes or so, and it was really good, better than normal. And he said, Mom, I was off today. I didn't do the show. She said, no, I heard you. I listened for about 20 minutes, and you were great. It was just really good, and I just wanted to compliment you. He said, Mom, seriously, I was off today. That was Patrick Madrid who did the show. His own mother thought that he sounded like me. So this is where it gets scary. I was speaking somewhere else in the country. I don't remember where. And I have my Immaculate Heart Radio app on my iPhone, as I hope all of you do on your iPhones and your Android smartphones. So I get into my rental car, and I fire up that app, and I start listening on the radio. And I'm listening. I didn't quite know exactly what it was, but I thought, I vaguely remember talking about this, and this is actually pretty good. Then the more I listened to it, I thought, I didn't realize how good this was, that I was explaining this topic so well. And I thought, I need to find this out so I can, get the audio and put it on my website. And then I listened and listened for about 5 minutes, and then I realized I was listening to Patrick Coffin. I thought it was me. I thought he sounded like me. I didn't know the difference. It was really scary. So, there's our radio news for the day. I want to talk this evening on a topic of great importance to everybody here, whether we all realize it or not, and that's the subject of moral relativism. And the term moral relativism, you might hear it from time to time, or you might have a general sense of what it might mean. Let me give you a few explanations of what it is and why it's a problem and how it affects our society, right down to your own children, right down to your own family. It's a very pervasive problem. Moral relativism is a worldview which posits that there is no such thing as an objective standard of morality. There's no objective standard of morality above us, so to speak, that is obligating us to live a certain way. Now, as Catholics and Christians, we believe, of course, that God exists, and if God exists, then a moral law of some sort must exist, and that moral law is independent of our own preferences and our own whims and fancies. It's something that is there whether we agree with it or not, but God leads us lovingly to see that his law is not designed to cause us unhappiness, but it's actually there to make us free. And a good analogy for this kind of thing would be if you wanted, for example, to be free to speak Mandarin Chinese, you would need to know the grammar rules, wouldn't you? You would need to memorize the way the language works. You'd have to learn the vocabulary. You'd have to speak Chinese freely. You would have to speak it according to the rules of Chinese. You couldn't just make it up on your own, could you? You wouldn't really be free to speak Chinese. You would just be making sounds. And that's not speaking Chinese. If you wanted to be a successful, happy driver, when you get your driver's license, you have to drive according to the rules of the state that you live in. So you'd have to know what speed limit to go, when to turn on your turn signal, what are the procedures to do in this case or in that case. And all those laws, including even something as simple as lane stripes on the freeway, they're there as rules, but they're there to make your driving experience safe and pleasant, and hopefully you'll get where you're going in one piece. That's freedom that comes from those rules. When you follow the rules, you enjoy a freedom. You have the open road. You can go wherever you want. You can do what you want behind the wheel of the car, going from point A to point B. But it's when somebody breaks the rules, whether it's speeding or not driving in the lane or doing something else, that's when the misery starts. And in an analogous kind of way, that's how God's law is for us. We're made to be free. We're made to be happy. And the thesis statement of the Catholic Church is that the moral law is not something that enslaves us, but it frees us from slavery. The slavery to addictions, for example. Addictions to whatever it might be. Could be substances, could be pornography, could be unhealthy relationships, could be power, could be sports, could be gadgets, could be social media. The list goes on. And I think we can all look around and see pretty clearly the sources of addiction in our society. They do really enslave us. They don't make us free. And moral relativism is a worldview that says, no. There is no such thing as a moral law as such. There is no such thing as a binding or obligatory moral law from God. Whether or not God may exist, there is no such thing as that. Rather, what is right and what is wrong is really dependent upon your own personal convictions. And perhaps you've seen these kinds of bumper stickers. Maybe you've seen the bumper sticker that says, question authority. Have you seen that one? It used to be popular in the 80s. I don't know if you see it as much anymore. Question authority, which is generally code for don't let anyone tell you that you can't live the lifestyle that you want, or that you can't, nowadays with the redefinition of marriage, that you can't marry whom you want, that kind of thing. It's kind of a pushback against Christianity and against the established morality of generations gone by. I remember one time I was speaking somewhere out of town, and I went into a parking lot of a Staples to buy some materials for the event that night. And as I was pulling my rental car into the parking lot spot, as I was pulling into the spot, there was a car directly in front of where I was parked that was covered with bumper stickers, left-wing bumper stickers, save the whales, coexist, the equal sign, and, it's a woman's choice, all of those kind of bumper stickers. So I figured, okay, this person's probably not likely to agree with me on too many issues and vice versa. And it just so happens that as I was pulling in, the man who owned the car, he was walking up to the car with his bag of stuff that he had just bought. And it was perfect because he was like right there 10 feet away from me. He was getting into his car as I was getting out of my car. So I thought, this is great. I don't live here. I'm going to be on an airplane tomorrow, so I might as well give it a try. So I said, hey, how's it going? He said, hi. I said, I noticed your bumper sticker, which in itself was funny because there were like 30 bumper stickers on the back of the car. He says, which one? I said, well, that one, the one that says question authority. And he said, yeah. I said, what authority do you have to tell me to question authority? And He looked at me like, what? And I said, who are you to tell me to question authority? And he's looking at me like, what are you talking about? And I said, your bumper sticker says to question authority. I want to know, what authority do you have to tell me to question authority? And then when he realized that I was, putting him on, he said, oh, it's just a bumper sticker. Then he got in his car and he drove away. But it was the perfect experiment for me, and it reminded me yet again about how when you begin to push a little bit on some of these types of slogans that pass for arguments, what you'll find is that the person who holds this view doesn't really know how to defend it. Another example, as Pat mentioned, Nancy and I have 11 children, and I was very happy when you all clapped because I know that you were clapping for Nancy because she did all the hard work. Believe me, she's done all the hard work. And Nancy and I have never been asked to teach natural family planning classes. I don't know why, but it's never come up. I was speaking somewhere again, and I was in line at a store to buy, a different store, different situation, to buy some stuff. And I was talking to one of my colleagues as we were waiting in line. And the woman in front of us, total stranger, when she heard me mention, and I think at the time we only had 8 or 9 children, some small amount of children by comparison. And she turned around and she looked at me with anger in her face, and she said, "You have how many children?" And I said, 9. And she said, "That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard in my life." And she was really angry. And I thought, well, why? I mean, I don't think of having a lot of kids as selfish because, you might not get the nice car because you're paying for diapers, or you not get the vacation because you're feeding and clothing all these children. So it didn't connect for me what she meant. And I said, "I don't understand. What do you mean selfish?" She says, "Well, you're taking up space and the resources and the carbon footprint." And she went into this whole thing. So I'm thinking, I don't even know what to say to somebody like this, but she was really angry. And she finished this by saying, "And I'll bet you're anti-abortion, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, what was your first clue? Was it the 9 kids, And she said, "Well, you better get over it." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You better get over it if you're anti-abortion because it's legal, so get over it." And I said, I'm confused. I don't know what you mean by that. Are you saying get over it because it'll never change?" She said, "Yeah, it'll never change." I said, "But it's wrong." She said, "No, it wouldn't be legal if it was wrong." And I said, "Oh." So then I realized I was dealing with a moral relativist. And I realized what to do next. So I said, slavery used to be legal in the United States. It used to be legal in the United States, according to the Supreme Court, for white people to own black people. Did that make it right? And the vein in her forehead started throbbing. She scowled at me. She didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say. She just scowled at me. Because see, what I was doing is I was relativizing something that she took very seriously. I mentioned the slavery issue. I said it was legal in Germany for the Nazis to kill 6 million Jews and other people besides. Did that make it right? And she just didn't say anything, but she was really mad. Then what I did, I don't know why I did it in this order, I went from 2 very horrifying things, slavery and the Holocaust. Then, by comparison, the third thing I mentioned was a lot less severe, but I said, and by the way, prior to 1920 in the United States, it was legal for men to prevent women from voting in elections. Was that okay just because it was legal? And she just stormed off. I mean, she just stomped away. I don't know if she paid for the stuff that she was in line to buy, but she was really angry. And it was another good experiment because what it showed, hopefully her too, was that as soon as you begin probing and testing this thesis, that in this case, that because it's legal, therefore it's morally permissible, it doesn't hold up very well. And when people begin to recognize that, a number of things can happen. They could get angry and walk away, but hopefully they continue to think about it. Or they could be thoughtful, and they may stop and say, I never looked at it that way. I've met a few people who have had that reaction. And my goal here this evening is to, as I'm going to do in the next several minutes, lay out for you a kind of overview of moral relativism and what it looks like, so when you see it, you'll know what it is. And then also offer you some techniques that I found to be very helpful when you're talking at Thanksgiving, when you have family coming over for the holidays. And maybe you've got a person in your family who is a moral relativist, who doesn't agree with you on matters of marriage or of raising children or even believing in God. There are some things that you can do, and I'll share those techniques with you that will help you keep control of the situation. You won't get angry. The other person might get a little bit flustered, but I'm going to show you a way that you can handle a conversation so that you won't. What is moral relativism in its natural habitat, and how do we understand it when we see it? I'll give you a couple of examples that will, I believe they'll probably horrify you because they're very grim examples, but they'll help us see what moral relativism looks like and how we get to where we are in a society when things begin to be skewed and distorted by moral relativism. Keeping in mind that moral relativism is the view that it's the individual's preference that matters. If it's true for you, then it's true for you, but it may not be true for this person. And don't push your morality on me. Those slogans. Don't be a hater. Don't be rigid. Don't be open to variety and things like that. And it always works in one direction, but not the other. I noticed. I was going to be talking about that on my radio program, and I probably will mention it perhaps even Friday. There were a series of lectures at college campuses that are billed as uncomfortable talks because they want to talk about things that some people get uncomfortable by. But when somebody said, I'd like to talk about a pro-life message, they said, no way, we'll not have that, because they were too uncomfortable with that uncomfortable talk that they weren't willing to do it. This is the kind of one-way street that you'll see with moral relativism. This is an example taken from a book called Relativism: Feet Planted Firmly in Midair. And it's really a very good book written by a Catholic and a Protestant, Frank Beckwith and Greg Koukl. Greg Koukl's the Protestant. And if you're interested in a book-length treatment of this topic, that might be one that you would do well to read. This is a story in that book by a woman named Jennifer Personius. Now, she's a nurse, or at least at the time of the writing of this, she was a nurse at a large hospital in the LA area. And so she's telling this story in her own words, and you would read it in that book. So she's saying, one night a nurse on my shift came up to me and said, Jennifer, you need to see the Garcia baby. There was something odd about the way she said it because we see babies born every hour. We went to a utility room that the nurses sometimes use for breaks. A few women were there smoking and drinking coffee, their feet up on the stainless steel counter, and there lying on the metal table was the naked body of a newborn baby. What's this baby doing here on the counter? I asked timidly. Well, that's a preemie born at 19 weeks, she said, and as you know, we don't do anything to save them unless they're 20 weeks. I noticed that the baby's chest was fluttering rapidly, so I picked him up for a closer look. This baby's still alive, I exclaimed. I thought they hadn't noticed. Then I learned the horrible truth. The nurses knew, and it didn't matter. They had presented the baby to its mother as a dead premature child. Then they took him away and tossed him on the cold steel counter in that room until he died. His skin was blotchy white. His mouth was gaping open as he tried to breathe. So I did the one thing I could think of. I held him in his last moments so he'd at least have some warmth and love when he died. Just then, one of the other nurses, a large, harsh woman, burst into the room and shouted, Jennifer, what are you doing with that baby? He's still alive, I said. He's still alive because you're holding him, she said, and grabbing him by the back of the neck with one hand, she snatched him from me, opened a stainless steel cabinet, took out a specimen container with formaldehyde in it. She put the baby in and snapped the lid on. It was over in an instant. To them, this child wasn't human. In 7 more days, he would have qualified, but at 19 weeks, he was just trash. And every time I read that story, it's always very difficult to get through, as I know it's difficult for you to hear it, but you have to hear it because that is the face of moral relativism. That is the face of the worldview that says, you can't tell me that this is wrong. If I want to do it, I'm going to do it. And you and your church and your dogma and your Bibles and your Pope and all that other stuff, you be quiet because you can't judge what I'm doing. This is true for me. It may not be true for you. If you don't want an abortion, don't have an abortion. But you can't tell me I can't have an abortion. If you don't like this lifestyle, don't live this lifestyle. But you can't tell me I can't live this lifestyle. That's the ugly face of moral relativism. And it truly is a life and death problem because people really do die. Here in the great state of California, our Catholic governor has just signed into law this new physician-assisted suicide bill. It's an evil law. People will die as a result of this evil law because it has been presented in a moral relativist fashion, which is, hey, listen, you know, if Archbishop Gomez doesn't like it, okay, he's in that kind of Catholic petting zoo. You know, they have their funny beliefs, those Catholics, and they still cling to the Bible and all this antiquated stuff. But we're enlightened here now. We know better. And we understand that people need to have choices. And, you know, that may not be true for Bishop Gomez or for Bishop Van, but it's true for this person over here, and you can't say that that's wrong. That's what I mean about life and death, because people really do die. And the amazing thing about that law is how many people thought it was a really great thing. I think the reason is because perhaps they didn't take into account the fact that eventually all of us will probably find ourselves ill, or perhaps in hospice, some of us. Some people will be in the hospital. Some people might have an accident and be in a vegetative state for a while. In the face of moral relativism in our society, which is pumped into people's minds on the radio, on television programs, in the movies, the national discourse, it's in politics, it's everywhere, it's conditioning people to see their own moral choices as purely their own decision, what's preferential to them. But heaven help the Catholic or some other religious person who would stand up and say, well, this is wrong. Because for something to be wrong, that means that there must be some standard above our own preferences. And if there's a standard above our own preferences, then that means we are sort of obligated to that standard then. And that's the very thing that people don't want to be obligated to. I mean, think of it. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just decide what to do however we wanted it and everything would work out? But experience shows us that whenever we fall into these traps of enslavement to immorality or enslavement to whatever the other issue might be, it always leads to misery, and it always leads, for many people, to some form of death. It could be death of a career, death of a marriage, death of relationships, and actual death itself. Moral relativism can also be seen in this second example. This was at the Cincinnati Art Center. It was a contemporary art center in the city of Cincinnati, and there was a Robert Mapplethorpe exhibit. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that name. Perhaps you've heard it before. And I will have to be, I see we have a few younger people in the audience, so I'm going to have to speak around some issues, but try to follow my meaning. They basically exhibit as art pornography, but not just pornography, very twisted, depraved, horrifying things that if I were to describe them to you, you might get sick to your stomach. So I won't describe them to you, but they are terrible and horrifying and pornographic. And families were going into this art museum expecting to see, you know, dinosaurs and things like that, and they were seeing this. So it went to court because people were suing, saying that this shouldn't be exhibited there. And in the court hearing, in the trial, one of the curators of another museum who was testifying on behalf of this Mapplethorpe art exhibit, I'll put the word art in quotation marks, was asked in the cross-examination if this picture, one particular picture that I don't want to describe to you, is art. And she said, yes, it's art. Is it fine art? Yes. Why? Because of the composition and lighting. That was the answer. And amazingly, the court case went in favor of the art exhibit. And the reasoning was that just because some families or some churchy people decided that they thought that was offensive, they didn't have the right to tell somebody else that what they were doing is offensive. So this is the nature of the problem. And I could go on giving examples, but suffice to say that in your dealings with people who hold this moral relativist point of view, generally it's going to come down on matters that tend to be sexual in nature. So you've got marriage issues, abortion, to some extent contraception, many Catholics in the United States and elsewhere have, without even realizing it, perhaps bought into a kind of moral relativist standpoint. I've met countless people who have said, we used to think, before we really were told, before anyone ever shared with us, why does the Catholic Church teach what it does on the issue of accepting life and welcoming life and not using contraception? I've had so many people say, we never knew this. We never knew why the church taught this. And we always just thought that, well, what is some celibate old man living in a castle in Vatican City? What does he possibly know about something like having kids? And so even though the Catholic Church says you shouldn't be contracepting, we know better because, hey, we're married and we understand what the pressures of life are all about. That's not an unreasonable way of looking at it. It's still wrong. But I could see how people could reasonably come to that conclusion and say, I'm the one that's got to pay the bills. I'm the one that's got to put the kids through school. And the Pope doesn't have to do that. It's easy for him to say, but it's more difficult for me to have to do it. I can understand how people would come to that conclusion. But time after time, when people have kind of broken free of that kind of relativist point of view and they understand why the church teaches this, then it suddenly becomes clear. And I've even had some couples weeping at times, just saying, we would have loved to have had more kids. We just didn't know. No one ever showed us. No one ever explained it to us. And they didn't even realize that they were entrapped in this kind of moral relativist outlook. If it's what I want to do or if it's not what I want to do, that's all that really matters, which is what it boils down to. So when you're talking about moral relativism with people who fall into these different groups, it could be on any of those issues that I just mentioned. It could be on a variety of other topics. But the main thing is you need to be able to reach them. You need to be able to help them see that what they're saying is actually incoherent. That's the area I'd like to move into now, and that is, how do you actually deal with this? It's not difficult to spot moral relativism. It's another thing to know what to do when you see it. So let me give you the 7 fatal flaws of moral relativism, and then I'll give you some sample dialogues and some techniques and things that I think you'll find very helpful. Number 1, the 7 fatal flaws of moral relativism. And by the way, if you want to read further on this topic, as I say, that book, Relativism, Feet Planted Firmly in Midair, is a really good resource. Number 1, relativists can't accuse others of wrongdoing. How can slavery or apartheid or using animals for laboratory testing or eating animals or smoking or anything else like that be called wrong or immoral if there's no such thing as an objective moral standard? And that's a great question to ask. If somebody says to you, listen, there's no objective moral standard, it's just what one person believes versus the other, then say, okay, well then what about slavery? Is that wrong? Is it always wrong, or is it only wrong for some people if that's what they think is wrong? What about murdering? Well, you could pick any example that you want, and you'll find very quickly that relativists will not stay relativistic all that long when what they hold to be very important winds up becoming relativized. Number 2, relativists can't complain about, much less can they solve the problem of evil. Because for evil to exist, there must be some absolute standard of good by which we measure evil. And if there's no God, which would be that absolute standard, there are no moral absolutes. So that's the way this equation works. If God does not exist, and it's really just us, a bunch of meat puppets, a bunch of pieces of animated dirt going through life in this aimless, meaningless existence that's not going anywhere. We didn't come from anywhere. We're not going anywhere. There's nothing above us. There's nothing outside of us. We're just here for some reason, and we want to have as much fun as we can before it's all over. Well, if that's the case, then God certainly doesn't exist. Then there are no moral absolutes. All there are our own opinions. And you may have the opinion that might makes right, so perhaps your opinion will prevail if there are enough of you who feel the same way, and you can force other people to bend to what you think is right. But there's still no absolute standard. It's every man for himself or every woman for herself. So if that's the case, if there are no moral absolutes, then there is no such thing as good and bad. There is no such thing as good or evil, right or wrong. There's no such thing as evil. All there is what you don't like. So you may say, for me, this is evil. That's just because you don't like it. For somebody else who likes it, it's not evil at all. It's good. One of the authors in this book, he says, the approach that many relativists will take at this point is confused. First, they will argue that the Holocaust was evil, and they'll ask, why would God allow such depravity? Later, when the tables are turned and their own behavior is called into question, then they say, how could a good God allow things that are contrary to my opinion? Or to put it more bluntly, I can't believe in the existence of a God who would disagree with me, which is really what it boils down to. The third point, relativists can't place blame or praise. If everything is equal, nothing can be called bad or wicked, nothing is deplorable or terrible, nothing is good, everything just is. Number 4, relativists can't make charges of fairness or injustice. This is crucial. You'll hear them say, those terrible people who stand outside of abortion clinics, or those terrible people who are trying to do X, Y, or Z, those terrible people who are supporting traditional marriage. I'm sure you heard the story of the former CEO of Mozilla, the big company that puts out Firefox, the web browser. Somebody digging around in his past found out that he donated, I forget if it was $1,000 or $10,000 to Prop 8. And this is when the pro-marriage push was very strong. And he donated some money because that's his personal belief. And they found this out long after the fact, and they hounded him out. He basically lost his job as a result of this. And you notice that the phraseology of, hey, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me, or vice versa, it's always a one-way street. It's always you have to bend to that point of view. You're never allowed to have your own point of view. That's going to get us into the issue of tolerance here in just a second. But relativists can't place charges of fairness or justice because if there's no objective moral standard, then there can't be any moral blame for doing something. And if there's no moral blame, then you're not guilty. And if you're not guilty, then there should be no punishment. And if you do punish somebody for something that you think is unjust, then you're imposing your morality on that person. You're not being tolerant. Number 5, relativists can't improve themselves morally. Again, nothing is better than anything else. So why be anything else other than a greedy, consuming, self-centered bundle of passions and appetites? Another great question to ask your atheist friend, if you have one, or your moral relativist friend, to say, okay, let's just press pause for a minute here. If God doesn't exist, okay, I'm not saying that you can't be good without God. You can be good. You can practice all kinds of natural virtues. You could be honest. You could be trustworthy. You could be punctual. You could help poor people. You could be super honest. I mean, you can go on down the list of all the good things that somebody who is an atheist can do, and some of them do these things. And very often an atheist will say, well, you're just saying that I can't be good without God, but I am good without God. I don't believe in God. You say this, you're hitting the bullseye on the wrong target. That's not the point. The point is, why should you be good? If God doesn't exist, think about this for a minute. If God doesn't exist and the moral relativist / atheist worldview is in fact correct, which of course then would add a great deal more proof to the Darwinian model of evolution, that the eons of random forces working against each other gradually in a meaningless, blind way wind up resulting in these evolutionary changes to species and changes from one species to the other. All the science is there. You can evaluate it for yourself. But the point is, that would be true. I mean, there would be no question that that is absolutely true. If God doesn't exist, that's purely meaningless. You'd all agree with that, right? I mean, I think that's true. If God doesn't exist, there is no meaning to any of it, other than the meaning that we impose on it ourselves. So if that's the case, then why wouldn't you want to cheat and kill and destroy if you could, if that's what you needed to do to make yourself richer or happier or have more things? And the question to ask, I believe, is why should you be good? What's the foundation for being good if God doesn't exist, if moral relativism is true? Which leads to point number 6, relativists can't hold meaningful moral discussions. What is there to talk about anyway? If there's no moral absolutes, why bother? What's the point? Number 7, relativists can't demand tolerance from anyone. Although they do, constantly. But they really can't, because tolerance, in this instance, is self-refuting. We only tolerate what we disagree with. If you love Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and somebody hands you your favorite cone of your favorite flavor of Haagen-Dazs, you don't tolerate it when you eat it, right? You love it. You enjoy it. We don't tolerate the things that we like. It's the things that we don't like. The airplane that I was riding on to come here today was very cramped. I was sitting in an exit row, which you would think would be very roomy, but in fact, it was extremely confining. The other seats in coach were roomier, and that's saying a lot, but they were roomier. And this aisle that I was in, it was like little torture chairs. I mean, you had these metal, it wasn't even like a normal chair where you had the armrest that would lift up. You kind of slide into this almost like a tube or a box, and you have these confining metal sides, and it's much more narrow. And so I'm on the aisle, and then there's a lady in the window seat. The guy sitting in the middle seat, this guy is like a bodybuilder, like Arnold Schwarzenegger or something. This guy's huge, and his arms and everything. So he had nowhere to put his arms except like into my space. So for 2.5 hours on the flight from Dallas to here, I tolerated what I really didn't like, which is I had to kind of sit like this and kind of lean out over the aisle, and then the drink cart was hitting me, and the shoulder is that's tolerating something. I didn't like it, but of course I couldn't beat that guy up anyway, even if I tried, so I had to tolerate it. Tolerance is something that is demanded of people, but in this case, it's self-refuting. Because if everything is equal and there are no absolutes, no objective rules, then there's no moral imperative for being tolerant. Think about that. Somebody says, you should be tolerant. Why? If you're right, why should I be tolerant? If everything is morally neutral and if everything is purely subjective, then you're refuting yourself to say that I should be tolerant. I should be intolerant if that's what I want, because that's my truth. You see how this works? Okay, so now let's go into some sample examples here. Here's some dialogues that may help you see how to do this. Somebody says, you shouldn't force your morality on me. Why not? Because I don't believe in forcing morality on other people. And you say, well, if you don't believe in it, then by all means don't do it. Don't force that moral point of view of yours on me. Or she says, you shouldn't push your morality on me. And you say, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Are you saying that I don't have a right to my own opinion? Well, yeah, you have a right to your opinion, but you have no right to force your opinion on anyone else. And you say, is that your opinion? Yes. Then why are you forcing your opinion on me? So she says, well, then are you saying that only your view is right? And you say, am I wrong? Yes, she says. And you say, is that your view? Yes. So then you're saying that only your view is right, which is the very thing that you objected to me saying. Or she says to you, don't push your morality on me. And you say, why? Don't you believe in morality? Sure, but I believe in my morality, not yours. And you say, well, then how do you know what's moral and immoral? She says, well, I think everyone should decide individually. And you say, that's exactly what I'm doing, and I've decided that you're immoral. So what's the problem? You see how this works? It's actually kind of fun once you get going. Somebody says, that's what bugs me about you Christians. You seem nice at first, but then you start getting judgmental. There's the other word, judgmental. What's wrong with that, you say? Well, it's not right to judge other people. Well, if it's wrong to judge other people, then why are you judging me? Well, all right, I guess you're right. I was judging you, but it's kind of hard to avoid it. So how about this? It's okay to judge people as long as you don't force your morality on them. And you say, is that your morality? That you shouldn't force your morality on other people? Yes. Then why are you pushing your morality on me? And he says, this isn't fair. I can't find a way to say it so it sounds right. And you say, it doesn't sound right because it isn't right. It's self-refuting. And at this point, he might get exasperated and throw his hands up and say, well, now you've got me confused. And you say, no, Bill, you were confused when you started. It's just that you're now beginning to realize it. This is not a difficult thing to do, but once you learn how to do it, it does become very effective. I was doing a speaking tour of Germany some years ago, and when I arrived there, I was doing a tour of universities and some churches too, but primarily at universities. And I was warned ahead of time that when I got there, they said, now listen, the German people, very intelligent as a people, They're very proud of their PhDs. They're very proud of their scientific and philosophical knowledge. They're just like really into the whole intellectual thing. They don't like to be told, especially not by the Pope, things about what they should believe and what they shouldn't believe. And just be aware of that, because they're like really sensitive about this. So I'm sweating bullets and thinking, how am I going to talk to these people? I've got all kinds of topics to talk about. I don't want them to, throw me out because they don't like what I'm saying. So I hit upon a way of doing it that actually worked. What I did was I said at each venue, I said, ladies and gentlemen, I am an American, obviously. I am an outsider, and I'm grateful to be here. And I would never presume to come and speak to you about your situation because I don't claim to fully understand it. But I am an expert in my situation. And I do know exactly what's going on in the United States. So let me share with you some of the problems that we're dealing with in the United States. And then I simply proceeded to describe the Germans. And I said, Americans, they love their PhDs. They love the intellectual life. They're very smart. They're very proud of that. They don't want other people telling them anything. And so I just simply, and it was funny because I could see on their faces this kind of consternation. They didn't realize what I was doing, and I could see that they were uncomfortable with the fact I was doing it. You can do something similar in your conversations with people by speaking about things in a way that does not attack them. That's the key. We don't want to attack them. Let me give you a couple quick stats and then a few more examples of what you can do, and then we'll wrap it up for a quick break, and then we'll take a brief intermission, and then we'll have questions and answers. So hopefully you'll be able to stay for that. I think there's refreshments over there as well. I was told that you can't have a brownie or anything to drink unless you buy books. So we'll talk about that. I'm just kidding. Christianity Today cited a Barna Research Group survey on what Americans believe, and it really does point to the fact that we're becoming a nation of relativists. The Barna survey asked, is there absolute truth? And of those surveys, 66% of American adults responded by saying they believe that there is no such thing as absolute truth and that different people can define truth in conflicting ways and still be correct, which is nonsensical, but 66% of Americans who were polled believe that. The figure went to 72% when it was asked of people between the ages of 18 and 25. This is back in the 90s. In 1988, going back quite a ways, the Rhode Island Rape Crisis Center polled 1,700 students in the 6th through 9th grades who attended an adolescent assault awareness class that was conducted in the public schools all across the state. Each boy and girl was asked if a man should have the right to force a woman to have sexual intercourse with him if he had spent money on her. Nearly 25% of the boys and 16% of the girls said yes. 65% of the boys and 47% of the girls in the 7th through 9th grades said it's okay for a man to force a woman to do this if they have dated for 6 months or longer. And 51% of the boys and 41% of the girls said that a man has a right to force a woman to kiss him if he spent a lot of money on her, which they defined as $10 to $15. So inflation probably should be taken into account there. This is an example of what we're dealing with. Now, that was in 1988, and things, of course, have only gotten worse since then. One final technique that I think you'll find helpful, and that is when somebody attacks you or challenges you, it could be about your Catholic faith, could be about believing in God, it could be about a moral issue, whatever it might be, the temptation is to stand and defend and to say, this is why what you're saying is wrong. But Catholics, we have this weird knack of getting ourselves on the defensive very quickly. Maybe your Protestant friend who might say to you, well, unless you can show it to me in the Bible, I'm not going to believe it. A lot of Catholics get uncomfortable and kind of queasy with that kind of thing. Don't let yourself get on the defensive, and here's one technique that really works to help you do that. When somebody launches the objection, rather than deliver your defense, I would recommend, and I talk about this at length. I have a whole chapter on this in my book called Search and Rescue, which I'll tell you about in just a minute. There's another book by that author I mentioned, Greg Koukl, called Tactics. And this book also goes into this technique very well. So somebody attacks you. What I would say is, say to the other person, what do you mean by that? And you notice what's happened. You've kept things calm. You're not on the defensive. and you've shifted it back to the other person. You've broken the dynamic of the attack and you've shifted it back. You say, what do you mean by that? Then she says, all right, well, what I mean by that is, and then she says it again, or she adds something more to it, she elaborates. It really doesn't matter. You've given yourself a little bit more time to think, and things are staying calm. Then when she restates her argument, then say, rather than defend, then say, how did you come to that conclusion? And you see what you've done? You've turned it back around again. So now the burden of proof is on the other person to defend her position or his position, and you're now in a situation where you can just simply ask well-placed questions. And you can be asking the questions that will lead to a certain conclusion that you want the person to see, but you're not lecturing, you're not pushing, you're not proving, and you're not defensive. It actually really does work, and it works in all kinds of situations too. You might want to try it with your 16-year-old sometime. We'll see how that goes. So final thought is this. We have to not be afraid to live the truth, obviously. The way we live is going to affect the way other people encounter Jesus. We have to not be afraid to speak the truth, and we have to not be afraid to suffer for the truth. And the suffering part is interesting when we consider the real suffering that Christians in other parts of the world are going through, like the martyrs in Libya, and the people who are crucified and burned alive and had their heads cut off by ISIS, and all the other horrifying examples of Christians who are not going to back down in their faith for Jesus, and they really do suffer heinously. It seems to me that we who have it so easy here in this country can put up with a little bit of ridicule or a little bit of pushback from other people and take it happily as a little opportunity to suffer for the sake of Jesus. So that's my final thought. In your efforts to explain your faith better, to share it with other people, when you have that smile on your face and you have the joy in your heart, it does really help people see in a way that's not just butting heads with them. They're actually seeing the love of Jesus coming through you, and it is very effective. All right, I'm going to just hit the 50-minute mark, so I'm going to leave it at that. Quick example or quick explanation of some of the books we have on the book table for you, and then we'll take our break for refreshments, and then we'll come back and do questions and answers. I will be sitting at that table off in the corner there, so if you brought books from home that you'd like me to sign, I'm happy to do that. If you would like to purchase books tonight, we accept any credit card known to man and woman on the face of the earth. If it's plastic and has a strip on it, we take it. It's actually on an app by Intuit, with the same people that do TurboTax and QuickBooks. So it's all secured and encrypted, and none of your information stays there. It gets sent and processed instantly. So you can use your credit cards. I'm also doing a special for you tonight. I came all this way. I want to do something nice. If you get $70 or more of any combination of things on the table, I'll give you this book absolutely free. It's a $20 book. It's Search and Rescue, How to Bring Your Family or Friends into or back into the Catholic Church. Please note, this is not a book to give to somebody who's away from the Catholic Church, because then they'll know what you're up to. This is a book for you to read so that you know how to talk to people, how to get into a conversation, how to not be put on the defensive. The book to give to somebody who's away from the church would be, among others, would be this one. This is Surprised by Truth 2. I think Pat Reedy might have mentioned the Surprised by Truth book when he introduced me. This is a compendium of 15 conversion stories. Now, I'm not a convert, as was mentioned. I'm a cradle Catholic, but my story is in here because I said, hey, it's my book. I'll put my story in there if I want to. I did have a deep reconversion experience. Although I never left the Catholic Church, I did have a deep reconversion, and I do share that from the heart in my chapter in this book. But this is a great book to give to your fallen away Catholic friend or loved one, your son or daughter who's left the church. This is the book to give them, and here's why. Over the years since this book has come out, I've gotten countless stories, emails, letters, handwritten letters from people who have just poured their heart out and said that the book and the testimonies in the book just changed them in a way that was, in some cases, miraculous. Quick example, a lady came up to me at a conference I was doing in Albuquerque, and I was signing books at the book table. She pointed at this book on the table. She said, this book brought me back to the Catholic Church. And I said, what happened? She said, well, after high school, I got into college, and I just walked away from God. and I didn't pray anymore, I didn't go to Mass anymore. She'd been raised Catholic. And she said, I lived a very wild life. She didn't elaborate, but I could figure it out. She said, I lived a very wild life, very far from God. And one day, 20 years later, I happened to be hiking in the middle of nowhere in Minnesota, and she said she stopped into a one-room post office to get stamps to mail some postcards. And she's somehow talking to the clerk in this one-room post office. Somehow it came out that she was an ex-Catholic. And he said, oh, you're an ex-Catholic? And he reached under the counter and he pulled out a copy of the book. And she said, no, I can't take your book. He says, no, I have a whole stack of them here. I keep them here for people just like you, and I just give them away. So she said, wow, really? And he said, yeah, take it. So she took it, and she actually started to cry when she told me this. She said, I took it, I started reading it, I couldn't put it down, I read it all the way through, and the next day, she said, I went to the nearest town, I found a Catholic priest, I went to confession for the first time in 20 years because the testimonies had touched her heart. One other quick example, there was a guy who was thinking about becoming Catholic. He was, I think, Baptist, and I was working with him, and I told him I would send him a copy of the book and some other things, and he said, well, if you do, you got to send it in a plain brown box without any Catholic identifying things on it, because my wife has already told me, because she was very staunchly Protestant, if I become Catholic, she'll divorce me and take the kids. And she's serious. She will do that because she really doesn't like the Catholic Church. So we can't let her know that you're sending me this stuff. I said, okay. So I put it in a plain box, his address, it was a UPS box, his address, return address, but no name or anything Catholic. And wouldn't you know it, that the UPS driver showed up at his house just after he had left to go run some errands. So his wife answers the door. She gets this box. It's mysterious. There's no indication why her husband's getting this box or who it's from. So she's shaking the box and she's trying to figure out what's in it. Pretty soon her curiosity gets the better of her. She actually opens the box and she has a fit because she sees this and she sees the other Catholic stuff. So when he gets home, like 15, 20 minutes later from the errand, she's locked herself in the bedroom now and she's screaming at him through the door. That's it, I'm divorcing you, I'm taking the kids. You know, you told me you weren't going to do this, and now you're doing it. So it was really a bad scene. So he sleeps on the couch, and he's telling me this story like a week later, and he says, I know my marriage is ending now. I'm sleeping on the couch. She won't come out of the bedroom. Early in the morning, 4 or 5 in the morning, she came out, and she woke him up, and she apologized to him tearfully. And he says, what happened? Earlier you were going to divorce me, and now? She says, well, now I understand a little bit more. And it's going to be okay if this is what you want to do. I don't agree with it necessarily, but I can at least understand it, so I'm not going to leave you, and I'm sorry for what I did. And he says, okay, but what happened? She said, well, I was so furious, I locked myself in the room. And then I realized after a while that I had locked myself in the room with this box. And I had nothing to do. She said I was, in there, and I didn't want to come out. So she said I picked up the book and started reading it. And she read the testimonies, and it touched her heart. And not only was their marriage saved, but also she, too, became a Catholic as well. So I offer you those examples. There are many others, but I'll leave it at that. Give those books to people that you know who are away from the church. This book also is yours for free. If you can pick one or the other if you get $70 or more. The book I really hope that you'll pick up, and pay for, too, but a book I hope you'll pick up is Why Be Catholic? 10 Answers to a Very Important Question. This is one of my newest books, published by Doubleday, hardcover. Archbishop Sean O'Malley of Boston wrote the foreword to it. If you want a non-confrontational, pleasant, easygoing presentation of the biblical and historical reasons for why people should be Catholic, this is what I put into the book. This is nearly 30 years of making the case publicly on the radio and at events like this. So if there's one book that I hope you'll all read, I hope it will be this one. And then lastly, just 2 more, and then I'm done with my commercial. For those who would like an overview of the faith, I wrote a book called Now What? A Guide for New and Not So New Catholics. So if you'd like to have a kind of an overview of the church, why do we do these things? Where did these things come from? This is the book. My book, Scripture and Tradition in the Church, is for anyone who deals maybe with Calvary Chapel folk or Protestant folk who say you got to go by the Bible alone and you don't really know what to say. Well, I wrote a book seeing it through the eyes of a Dominican scholar, Cardinal Yves Congar, that explains it, why we have scripture and tradition. So with that, I'll say thank you for your attention. We'll take a break, and then in a little while, I'll come back up and we'll do Q&A, and I will be at the table there to sign books for you. Thank you very much.